Good evening from the Heinrich Böll Foundation South Caucasus with branches in Tbilisi and Yerevan. My name is Sonja Schiffers and I'm the director of the office based in Tbilisi, and I will be moderating this event. While Russia is continuing to wage its war against Ukraine, it also carries on with hybrid attacks in the European neighborhood. Just recently, we saw major Russian interference in Moldova's parliamentary elections. Russia used disinformation, illicit political financing, energy blackmail, and religious and cultural linkages to influence the public against the pro-European ruling party. But Russia was unsuccessful. Coordinated state action and robust civil society engagement helped the country to withstand such multi-layered interference and safeguard its democratic resilience. Learning from Moldova's experience can help Armenia anticipate and mitigate external interference in its electoral process, as Armenia approaches critical parliamentary elections to be held on June 7, 2026. Meanwhile, information integrity and public trust in democratic processes are facing growing challenges in Armenia. Russian disinformation continues to shape public opinion, polarize society, and undermine trust in state institutions. These narratives, often amplified by pro-Russian local media, social networks, and proxy platforms, exploit existing divisions to weaken Armenia's democratic resilience. Yet, disinformation represents only one dimension of a broader pattern of Russian external interference. Armenia is increasingly exposed to hybrid threats from economic coercion and energy dependency to diplomatic manipulation, border tensions, and intimidation of its diaspora abroad. During this webinar, we will discuss how Armenia can safeguard its information space and democratic resilience despite the challenging regional environment, learning from Moldova, and with EU support. We have 1 hour 15 for this webinar. We will record it and share it online later, so you can also rewatch it later. We are joined by 4 excellent speakers whom I will introduce later, 2 from Armenia, 1 from Moldova, and 1 who will speak from a Brussels perspective. Thank you all for joining, and thanks to our attendees, of course, as well. After inputs from our speakers, there will be time for a Q&A session. Questions can be asked anytime via the Q&A tool. Feel free to get started early. And to set the stage, we start with welcome remarks from Aymeric Dupont, Deputy Head of the Division for Moldova, Belarus, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan at the European External Action Service in Brussels. And Mr. Dupont, it would be great if you could explain to us why Russian interference in Armenia is an issue of concern for the European Union, and also what the EU is doing and what it can do next year to support Armenia's democratic resilience and electoral integrity. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues. I'm very honored to speak today and to open this very timely panel. I would like to thank the Foundation for hosting it. I think it's timely in particular because just 2 days ago, we had the EU-Armenia Partnership Council right here in Brussels. Time and again, over the last years, we've been reminded that the security of our democracies is not only protected and defended at the borders, but increasingly it's defended in the information space. And the resilience of our societies depends on many factors that our adversaries constantly try to undermine. But yet, as we look across our neighborhood, and you've mentioned the countries that my division is in charge of, we see democratic processes constantly under attack. And I don't think this is a new phenomenon. We just need to look at 10, 15 years back on what happened in our region. But it has clearly become more acute, more sophisticated. At the same time, we've grown increasingly aware. I think our response is today much more solid than it was before. It's more comprehensive and it's clearly more resolute. The facts speak for themselves, and you've, I think, eloquently described them in your introduction. Russia, external actors, but in particular Russia, when it comes to our neighborhood, wages hybrid campaigns against democracy, against stability. Behind that is a very calculated strategy, of spreading blatant lies, running disinformation campaign, which have become more and more efficient through the use of artificial intelligence and social media, which are widely consumed now everywhere on the globe, but also through the provision of illicit financing to their political proxies. And again, with the use of cryptocurrencies, we know that this is something which is easier to do than by carrying wallets of cash. And last but not least, with the use of economic and energy blackmail against these countries. You've also mentioned very rightly the intent to sow division in societies by using as many levels as possible, and we do see that indeed. The aim is also very clear. By doing so, they will try to undermine the public trust. They will sow division, and they will also slow the democratic momentum and the reforms that the countries are trying to implement. And by doing so, they will affect the trajectory of these countries. In particular, I think this matters to us as they try to get a closer relationship with the EU. You're asking why Russian interference in Armenia ahead of the elections next year would be an issue for the EU, and I think the answer is quite straightforward. Our values, our security, our stability are interconnected, and this is true in a globalized world, but it's even more true in the neighborhood. And when one of our partners, and with Armenia, we just signed a new strategic agenda for the EU-Armenia partnership, is targeted by external interference, it's not only a threat to Armenia's own democratic resilience, but also a threat to the stability of the region. And at the time when Armenia and Azerbaijan made an historic path last August towards peace, which we want to support as much as possible, this is not something that we can let happen. We cannot let interference derail these processes. And this is really why we are committed to help Armenia build a stronger resilience against external interference ahead of the elections, which are going to happen in June of next year. I wanted to go back to Moldova, and I think you have invited some panelists who would be able to speak even more in details on what they have seen in Moldova. Moldova was in an electoral cycle which culminated this year with the parliamentary election, but also had a very important referendum and presidential elections last year. And to counter the hybrid threats in Moldova, the EU has taken really a comprehensive approach. For the first time, we deployed CSDP mission, the EU partnership mission in Moldova, which had a quite unique mandate in supporting the authorities to reinforce the capacities with regards to increasing the country's resilience, increase the crisis management capabilities, because for external actors, it's quite easy to destabilize a country by trying to show that the government is not competent to handle crisis, so therefore crisis management is a crucial element. But also the capacities of the country to respond and to counter hybrid threat, including the cyber attacks, but also FIMI, foreign information manipulation and interference. But for Moldova, we went also a bit further. As you know, the EU also imposed targeted sanctions on individuals and entities who were aiming and trying to destabilize the country. I mentioned earlier the energy dimension, and indeed with Moldova, we also signed a historic energy package to, in the medium run, fully decouple Moldova from the Russian energy supplies, which had been historically also an important lever. And last but not least, because this needs to, it's the entire society which needs to benefit also from this support. We have provided, and we are providing massive gross plans of 1.9 billion euro to accelerate economic integration and stability to Moldova. Coming back now to Armenia, because that's going to be the main subject of your discussion today. In the strategic agenda that we just signed this week, we have underscored a very strong commitment to increase cooperation in the fields of security, of crisis management, of hybrid threats, and of cyber resilience. And that's going really to drive our efforts in the coming year. It's also accompanied by a substantial financial package in the resilience and growth plan, reaching 270 million euro. But we will be equally committed to support democratic resilience and electoral integrity, and that will entail notably support to detect, to analyze, and to respond to foreign interference. I wanted to conclude by referring to the words of HRVP Kaya Kallas on Tuesday after the Partnership Council with Armenia. And as we learned in Moldova, countering foreign interference is not a one-off. It's a lasting process, but it also requires a whole of society approach. It means that we need to support an active civil society, but also free and independent media, because they are essential in making sure that that the country operates elections in an information space which is credible. We will and we do stand firmly by the side of Armenia to face these challenges because we know we are entering a crucial year for the country. I wanted to close by again thanking the Foundation for organizing this very timely discussion, but also for broadly your commitment to promote democratic values in the region. I will have to leave you after this opening remarks, but I wish you a great event, and again, thank you for your invitation.
Thank you very much for those excellent points, which I think we can build on later and also discuss with Nadia, who is based in Brussels. Let's begin with our first regular speaker, Vardine Grigorian from the Helsinki Citizens Assembly Vanadzor office. She's a program manager there and was instrumental in establishing and leading the work of the Independent Observer Alliance that has been observing Armenian elections for almost a decade. And Vardine has also participated in several CSO election observation missions abroad and led large missions domestically. And she also prepares and submits reports to international organizations on democracy and human rights related issues in Armenia, focusing again on elections, democratization and human rights. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I asked you to focus in your input on the goals of Russian interference in Armenian politics, but also on what hybrid threats and early actions of Russian actors we can already identify when it comes to electoral interference, pre-electoral interference. It's still 7 months, I think, until 6 months until the elections. And also, I think it would be interesting if you could share your insights on the grounds, domestic grounds that Russian interference falls on. What are the domestic vulnerabilities, but also legitimate or less legitimate grievances that remain unaddressed by the government and can be easily exploited by Russia and through external interference. You have 7 minutes for those questions, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm not sure I will be able to speak within 7 minutes, or maybe less, maybe more. Because as I've been listening to you, I've been trying to kind of edit what I wanted to say. So first of all, I do want to add to the comment that I just saw in the chat about, yes, we need to take into consideration that when we're speaking about Armenia, it's not just Russian interference. It is important to note that because we tend to recognize what we have already seen. And in this case, the community in our region, international community in our region, has already seen the Russian interference, and this is what has become diagnosed and identified. But we do see Russian influence also with kind of combined with Azerbaijani influence and Turkish influence as well. It is also interesting that there's a kind of a hybrid influence in this case, because you wouldn't really be able to fully identify whether that's the origin of it is coming from Azerbaijan or coming from Turkey, or it is being presented as such. Or in some cases, it was identified that eventually it was actually Russian presented as Turkish. For example, if we're speaking about disinformation that appears in Turkish media outlets and then appears in the Armenian media outlets, and then you kind of are able to track it down to being Russian generated. So it is quite diverse, but we also, and we're speaking about hybrid threats, this is of course including also physical threats, not only the threats on the cyberspace. And in the Armenian case, we have noted as observers that since 2021, basically, we have never had any elections which were not preceded by some escalation on the border. So there is also the physical threat as well, and which of course also puts the country in a position of consistent fear, and the public as well, of what is going to happen and how they should react. And so kind of like in this case, the hybrid threats are building on the existing fears and distrust, trying to amplify them and trying to direct them in a way that would be feeding the interests of the Russian actors or the other actors. We do see that in terms of Russian interference, the kind of general tone of it is to promote the idea that Armenia is unable to get away from Russian influence, and it comes with the economic dependence, it comes with the energy dependence, it comes with the security dependence that is consistently reinforced in the narratives and in kind of the actual circumstances of, for example, blocking the export of some goods or something like that. So it's kind of like both physical interference and interference in digital space that is promoting this narrative of Armenia not being able to get away, not being a sovereign, independent actor that it is trying to become. Of course, this is not something peculiar to Armenia. It is basically what we're seeing in all post-Soviet countries, with to some extent, and we do see that it is being successful in some and some not. When we're speaking about Armenia, it is also important that when on the ground at the moment, it is Russian influence is not as successful as it could have been before the war, because we saw that the kind of interference and kind of narratives actually started or amplified after the revolution, because this is when they were also trying to promote the idea or kind of question whether Armenia's democratic path is in fact something against Russia or something purely domestic. And this is when kind of Armenia was consistently forced to reiterate that it is an internal matter, it's not geopolitical. Eventually, the situation changed, and we do see that there is a geopolitical shift in a direction as well. And this is, of course, not going to be easy for Armenia. And we're seeing this also in terms of the vulnerabilities that you mentioned, being the Nagorno-Karabakh issue, refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh, their needs when it comes to social economic needs, and also the idea of right to return or not, like how the security could be ensured or should be ensured, where Armenia stands in this case, and what was kind of the fault of Armenia in this entire situation, and how Russia was involved. One of the main narratives that Russia is promoting through the Armenian opposition and opposition-minded media is the fact that Armenia is basically to be blamed for the war and for all the consequences, kind of leaving out completely Azerbaijan and its fault, and of course leaving out Russia and its obligations as a security guarantor. So we're looking at kind of a situation where they're trying to portray the Armenian government as solely responsible for the situation, for the security situation we have in the country, for the defeat in the war, and for the possible consequences. But on the ground, we have the situation of the majority of the population, as we see from surveys, not really buying into it and understanding that this could not be a legitimate justification. And if we're looking at kind of like how Russia is perceived by the public, recent surveys show that it is seen as one of the main threats for the country, along with Turkey and Azerbaijan, which is something that is unprecedented if we're looking at kind of like our modern history. So it is definitely, it definitely shows that, at least for now, the disinformation and kind of the activities that Russia has been promoting in Armenia have not been successful. And hopefully that will stay that way. But it is also obvious that we do have a lot of political actors and a lot of media and even local organizations that are funded by Russian sources, either openly or not openly, and are trying to promote kind of, again, this like pro-Russian narratives and trying to promote the idea that whatever aspirations Armenia has in terms of the European Union are just temporary and unreal and unrealistic. So this is kind of where this is headed. Yeah, I guess, yeah, I will wrap up and maybe wait for questions, because I do realize that this is such a broad topic to put in 7 minutes.
Yes, that's very true, but thank you very much for sticking to the time. Let's continue with Artur. Artur Papian is the South Caucasus manager for the London-based Media Diversity Institute and co-founder of CyberHub Armenia. He's also the president of the Yerevan Press Club and has worked on several fact-checking TV programs, produced podcasts on fact-checking and digital security, and worked as a journalist for more than a decade. I asked you to focus mostly on the main foreign influence manipulation narratives spread by Russian and Armenian actors. Vaidina has already mentioned some of them. Maybe you could build on that. And what she hasn't mentioned, I think, is this whole traditional values narrative, which is very typical for Russian disinformation. Is this also prominent in Armenia? Would be great if you could talk about that. And then also, what is the role of social and traditional media in spreading Russian disinformation? And it would also be interesting if you could discuss how you position yourself, or what is the discussion in the Armenian society regarding regulation of the media, because I know that this is quite a controversial issue, yet one of the ways to control disinformation. So the floor is yours. You also have 7 minutes.
Quite a broad spectrum of questions. I would actually like to start from the fact that the Armenian media landscape is highly polarized, because the Armenian media market is very small and it's populated with a lot of media outlets. And while advertising revenues are migrating to Googles and Facebooks of this world, Googles and Facebooks do not bring any value back to the Armenian media. There is no advertising revenues available. So sort of the market for the media is drying out. The money-making opportunities are not there, and all media are leaning to these or that political sponsors. And this is extremely important in the context of the upcoming elections, because with highly polarized media, most media outlets only think about serving one master, or two for the best case scenario. Some of those political parties in their turn have various affiliations with business circles, some of them Russian leaning, the others are more or less pro. I wouldn't even antagonize Armenian government, the current government or ruling party, to Russia, not necessarily. While we see hostilities, we also see that the current authorities in Armenia will also engage in some occasions with Russian partners, because they understand very well that Russia has all the levers. If it pulls down the energy level or it pulls down the transport or trade levels, basically Armenia is cooked. So the Armenian authorities, current ruling party, are playing this fine game, trying to balance between EU and Russia. And so in this media environment, there are some pro-government media outlets which have been built up till this throughout this post-revolution era. Then there are pro-Russian ones, and there are other economic circles present on the ground. And with these highly polarized media fighting with each other, never questioning their masters, but always questioning even anything that positive they see on the other side. We are left with a society which has deep distrust towards the media. And over the past public opinion surveys carried out by CRRC and IRA, we are finding that media has very, very low trust. This is extremely important because when people find there is a vacuum of trust toward traditional media in this environment, there is more trust towards influencers because people feel some sort of a personal connection to this or that person. And when I say influencers, that those can be political commentators. Those could be people, for example, we have some diaspora Armenians based in the United States promoting very strikingly pro-Russian, for example, formulas and concepts, which is like astonishing to see in some regards. And then there is this fertile ground for all sorts of highly biased points of views to spread there. Another factor is that over the past public opinion surveys, we saw that 60% of the population has no, if they went to the polls tomorrow, they wouldn't know who to vote for. So there's fertile ground, no media or lack of media trust, trust to influencers. In this situation, it is highly likely that any big scoop that spreads around telegrams and TikToks of the world may turn around the elections, and we are in a very, very dangerous situation in this regard. So what are we seeing in this situation? Like Sosi Tatikyan, my former colleague, friend, duly noted, and Vartine just did as well, very rightly pointed, we are seeing a situation when we have various disinformation actors on the ground. Especially active are Azerbaijanis and Russians, and in that exact order. And they are playing in this field with good passes, like a football match. You will see some disinformation shaping up in Azerbaijan facilitated circles, and then it's picked up by the Russian ones, and then vice versa. So this game is playing, and it's very, very confusing because also people are finding it very hard to understand what is the vector of this specific piece of disinformation. Where are they leading to? Again, some things that we are seeing, both which is common for Russian and Azerbaijani FIMI towards Armenia, is strangely not directed towards Armenia itself, but rather Armenia's partners and diasporan Armenians. Even though Armenian diaspora has no right to vote in the Armenian elections, they have a lot of influence, especially financially, because they're helping families, and so they have a big say in how people behave. Especially, we have a 2 million strong Russian Armenian diaspora, and we are seeing narratives like these governments are abandoning all Armenian traditional values, like Sonia, you just noted very rightly, or that this Armenian government, they don't care about Armenian religion, Armenian culture. There's even this hoax about concentration camps, like in Nazi Germany, being somewhere located in Armenia. There's also those disinformation narratives about Armenian government's, current Armenian authorities' disregard for its population. We see the traditional narratives since the 1916s about papillomavirus or all sorts of, I forgot the damn word, vaccinations, yes, anti-vaxxers, the traditional anti-vax topics there, like this government is promoting vaccinations because they want to, reduce or harm Armenia's reproductive growth abilities type of narratives, as well as we see narratives like this government is partnering with France authorities in secret. They're building nuclear waste disposal sites because Russia is under sanctions, so France has nowhere to store, and then this criminal government is sort of allowing this to happen. All of these narratives are of course fakes. But the important thing that's the reason they work is because sometimes they bring a little bit of truth into it, and people are inclined to believe this. There is this general narrative that EU is pushing Armenia to shut down its nuclear power plant, which is partly true. because this is a very dangerous nuclear power plant and it should be shut down pretty soon. But European partners are working to strengthen its defenses, make it less dangerous, putting millions of dollars into it. But the narrative is there propagated. And everybody in Armenia remembers those years when the nuclear power station was shut down and we had huge problem with electricity. So all of those even latent fears from the 90s are being exploited by the threat actors to make sure that everybody is really scared about all those problems that European Union is sort of imposing upon us. Per disinformation actors, we are noticing big players, for example, the Matryoshka operation, double Gengar operation, those servers, those threat actors, those IP addresses, domain registration details, which we were seeing in Ukraine in the context of Russia-Ukraine war, in Moldova and Romania in the context of the previous election cycles. We are seeing that on the same server or with the same registration agent. A new site is registered, but with very Armenian themed topic or copycats of Armenian websites. And these are being exploited now. And even the tactics are not changing very much. To cut it short, we're seeing a lot of new stuff, even though the situation is somewhat different. So we have the additional threat actor in the face of Azerbaijan, but all in all, we have much to learn and explore also from the past experience in Moldova, Romania, Ukraine. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Artur. And I think we will have some time to dive deeper into some of these issues during the Q&A session or after your inputs. First, I would like to move to Paula. Paula Erizanu is a writer and journalist from Chisinau, Moldova. And she studied history with literature and history of art in London and also journalism, and has worked as a journalist for the BBC, The Guardian, London Review of Books, Kiev Independent, and published several books about Moldovan politics. And she's one of the most active, probably, commentators on Moldovan politics in the last few years internationally. So thank you, Paula, for joining. And we hope to learn from the Moldovan experience. First of all, would you agree that it was as positive and the government's and civil society's response to Russian interference as successful as it's often portrayed? But then again, also, what did Russia do to influence the Moldovan pre-election environment, and how did the response counter Russia's actions, and what could Armenia learn from that? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we can always do better than we have, and of course, when you are on the ground, you see the mistakes a lot kind of bigger and closer than people abroad do. But surely there are lots of similarities between the situation in Armenia and Moldova. I felt like there was familiar ground with the media landscape, for instance, that we heard about earlier. It is similarly polarized in Moldova, but I think now that's the situation across the world, with algorithms that encourage rage rather than dialogue. And equally, just like in Armenia, the publicity market and the advertising market in Moldova is tricky, and our kind of pro-human rights media institutions rely on foreign grants often. We also have a strong Moldovan diaspora, but ours is more progressive so far. From what I understand in Armenia, the Armenian diaspora tends to be more conservative. But I'll dive into the key questions that you sent me in advance. What did Russia do to influence the Moldovan pre-election environment? Well, we had illegal money going into political parties, which I guess is their practice across the world. We had the cyber attacks that we heard about earlier, false bomb alerts, hundreds of false bomb alerts to keep the state institutions busy. and not allow them to kind of deal with the real problems we deal with. They used the church and priests in order to push for a pro-Kremlin agenda, especially to do with this traditional kind of family values that we talked about. And they used their own kind of network of journalists, Telegram channels, and agents of influence that are infiltrated everywhere, including in civil society on the right and on the left side of the political spectrum. They also created an army of online bots that activated the same kind of Ilan Shor network, which had protested on the streets before. What the Kremlin is very good at is to study your own kind of problems and then exploit them. So for us in Moldova, it was the cost of living crisis, which was exacerbated by the energy crisis and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but also the kind of fear of the unknown, which goes hand in hand with this kind of attraction to the traditional value narrative that the Kremlin is pushing for. And there was one question about which actors Russia chose and did they choose the right ones? The answer is no. They resurrected politicians of the past, a lot of kind of expired faces. So for example, Vasile Tarlev was prime minister when I was in primary school, and then he disappeared from public life for 20 years. And now he was kind of resurrected as this zombie politician with a new kind of political party that is now in parliament. But after elections, Russia is changing strategy and they are focusing on creating new political leaders with a more kind of moderate, masked Eurosceptic discourse. I'm curious to learn whether this is similar or not in Armenia, maybe in the Q&A. What I've seen in research done by one of my friends who is doing a PhD at Princeton on the subject, Isabel De Sisto, is that Russian propaganda was more effective on older people who go to church and also consume a lot of Telegram and TikTok, which I think kind of sums up the situation neatly. Although, of course, a lot of elderly people have actually voted for PAS, the pro-European ruling party. Can we say that given the winning of the pro-European government, Russian interference successively pushed back? Well, I think actually we are kind of halfway through our kind of hybrid war with Russia, and obviously we depend on what happens globally. But what can Armenia learn from Moldova? Good and bad practices. There was already talk about sanctions. What was highly effective was the way the courts and the police worked in order to stop illicit political funding. We had more open, proactive communication by the police, the anti-corruption bodies, and even the intelligence services. This was something very new for Moldovans, to have the kind of head of our intelligence services come and give press conferences that would kind of inform us about the sort of destabilization plans that Russia had for Moldova. In terms of kind of political parties, they had genuine and very active door-to-door campaigning throughout every village, north and south, although there was criticism that some areas were kind of left out, where the kind of ruling party thought that they didn't really stand a chance, and people criticized them for kind of abandoning some communities. What they were good at were, and I think this was a common effort from civil society and the political scene and the kind of mainstream pro-democratic media, was that we kind of had this national unity narrative and focus on positive, inclusive messages. Political kind of high officials like Maya Sandu would include sentences in minority languages in her speeches sometimes, or she would be kind of be baking goods with kids for Easter and so on, and give these speeches that would inspire unity rather than division. They were really good as a political party to push one narrative for the kind of the need to integrate Moldova in the EU in the next few years, and they kind of dominated the public discourse with this narrative. But I think what was most exciting for me as a journalist and writer was that we had incredible storytelling in this campaign, coming from investigative journalists and also from the kind of film industry. So 2 years ago, we had one groundbreaking investigation with a hidden camera where 2 journalists basically infiltrated Insure's network and showed how the whole network was functioning. And then they basically became these trendsetters, because in the next elections this year, we had about 6 investigations that were really well made and felt like thrillers. And I think that really changed the game. And there was a lot of solidarity in the media. So that first investigation was shown by several TV channels, and it was shared widely, and it got like the European Press Prize and so on. And the next year, even the BBC did a kind of collab with local journalists and infiltrated in this online network of bots. And then the other exciting thing was that we had a film series reminding people of our recent history. It was called Plaha, and it ran just before elections. So it was a bit controversial about whether that's kind of that is interference in elections or not. But it's basically a kind of biopic about our own kind of local oligarch Plahotniuk, who held power especially between 2016 and 2019, and who, it happens, is now back in Moldova after years of being abroad, and he is in handcuffs and being investigated for the crimes he committed. And that was a political thriller as well, and it had record audiences, and I think it was like hugely influential in reminding people that what we have now is not perfect. It's not what we fully want, but remember what we had in the past. And then the final kind of question that you sent me in advance was, how did the EU and other partners support Moldova? Was that support sufficient? Well, in addition to all of the kind of cybersecurity support, economic support, energy support, which genuinely helped Moldova to stay on track and not fall kind of back into Russian hands. In terms of communication, we had EU leaders come to Moldova on symbolic days, on Independence Day. And I think, I'm not sure to what extent this we can talk about like one individual success, but I guess something that has happened in recent years is that our kind of European officials have started to speak in less stiff and technocratic language, and instead they have become a lot more kind of exciting and creative and funny even in their communication. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Paula, with some really interesting points that I would love to discuss with Artur and Vardine afterwards, especially Moldova's experience in using the courts and police and corruption bodies, intelligence services against external interference. Also the national unity narrative, the EU integration narrative. I think all of these are a bit more complex in the Armenian context, probably. So would be great if we find some time later to hear your opinions on that. But first, let's move to Nadia Kowalczykova from the European Union Institute for Security Studies. She's a senior analyst in charge of the transnational security portfolio and a project director of the EU-funded initiative on countering foreign interference. In particular, she focuses on hybrid threats, disinformation, resilience, and democracy, election security, and transatlantic cooperation. So, Nadia, I would like to ask you, based on your wide and broad experience in researching FIMI and electoral and political interference, what should countries in the EU neighborhood generally prepare for next when it comes to those issues? And also what works well, what has worked well in some contexts when pushing back this interference? And lastly, also, how would you assess the EU support in the fight against Russian interference in the EU neighborhood? We heard that in Moldova, it seems to have been quite comprehensive. Would you share that, or are there also some more critical perspectives? So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sonia, and it is a pleasure to be part of this discussion. I will try to stick to the 7 minutes, but also looking forward to the conversation after. So what to prepare for next? I think it's very good to just review what our colleagues mentioned already. This hybrid threat landscape is really broad. And yes, indeed, there has been a lot of focus on the electoral interference, elections, both that took place in Moldova and will take place in Armenia, but also that took place elsewhere, where we see some common issues, some common threats, but also challenges that have been perhaps in a way newer, and also the responses, as it was very interesting to hear the Moldova innovative approach and this kind of integrated approach through other tools, even legal tools, to address these issues of disinformation through also perhaps this investigation and anti-corruption and other ways. So showing this very much interlinked landscape of threats, which I think it's important to keep in mind when we are addressing any domain of hybrid threats, that these are not in isolation, that many times these operations happen across the domains in parallel, but also we may respond to that or be more effective if we perhaps even mobilize the tools that may seem to be more linked to one domain, but they can be effective also to the other domain, let's say, less traditionally used. For example, the sanctions, as it was mentioned, that is a newer, sharper tool also against foreign information manipulation interference, or the use of hybrid operations that did not have this application before in these domains, or as we see, for example, this anti-fraud where you can, or some cyber operations where you can either detect or you may be able to disrupt this operation. So to prepare for next, knowing that this is really a broad landscape of threat, I think important is to consider the technological aspect. We see and speak a lot about how the use of technology can scale up and speed up and really broaden up the impact and the reach of these operations. And I think we need to prepare for that being even more accelerated, and the use of technology being used and misused even more for that, especially when we speak a lot about what type of narratives and how certain cleavages, historical, cultural, religious, or any other ones are being used. To keep in mind that I think next we will see even more of this audiovisual use and the consumption of this information and disinformation across different media, both traditional and especially the social media, throughout these audiovisual tools that are increasingly more used but also consumed. And for example, we saw that during the European parliamentary elections, most engagement on disinformation was happening over TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, which means also knowing that these platforms are mostly used through the audiovisual tools. It also shows what type of content really resonates and amplifies quickly. And I think this will be even more when we see that also the attention span, but also the way people consume information is evolving in this direction. Second, I think it's also very important that we have to get prepared for even more aggressive operations. We see that the types of interference, be it both in the information space, but also attacks on the critical infrastructure, the use of drones, interference of the airspaces, also not only of the countries in the neighborhood, but also within the EU, the provocation, the different signals of threats. This is becoming more aggressive. And I think we should be prepared for also the cyber operations, also the number of them, but also the type of them, attacking the infrastructure that is critical, be it government websites, hospitals, schools. We saw also the information manipulation through the bomb threats in different countries, also prior to the elections, to intimidate. I think this escalation and aggression in the field of hybrid threats is going to grow, where also the linkages between this kinetic and non-kinetic will be even closer in the future. And perhaps the third aspect I would like to maybe bring to the table as what to expect next, or be prepared or try to prepare for, is the psychological operations. I think in the sense of it's not only to saturate the information environment with more information and confuse people and divide them, but also have this longer term impact on shaping their behavior and therefore decisions in a longer term. So the psychological operations that often are covered, and many times also in the field of military operations, military domain, are, I think, going to be even more present in the civilian domain, and will be more insidious as well, with also this escalated or increasingly more violent, maybe use of vocabulary, but also the feeling of the, threat and fear that the targeted citizens or viewers or different audiences will feel. So also really touching on the emotions, but also on the rational behavior that may be shaping their decisions in the future. So this cognitive dimension, I think, will be exploited even more. So what worked well at the domestic level and perhaps in different contexts? I think quite a few examples were used by my colleagues here. I think that was extremely interesting to hear in the context of Moldova and Armenia. So maybe just to kind of see what I see is maybe some pattern or trend that works well. So it's this pre-banking, we call it like this in the EU space. It's to really communicate about these issues in a timely way. So speaking about these issues prior to the elections, couple of months, that's too late. So let's say in the context of the 6 months prior to the Armenian elections, or in the context we saw even in other countries in the member states of the EU, couple of years before. So it means that these operations are really deployed quite often. Maybe they are a bit more scaled up prior or around the elections time, but there is a need, and we have a lot of evidence, a lot of information where we can inform people what to expect, so they are less surprised and therefore less vulnerable when this is happening and visible across their media channels when they see this information. So to really communicate on these threats effectively, not to the extent to scare them, but really fact-based, really evidence-based, but in a way to prepare them so they are ready and they are able to recognize this. I think this is important both at the domestic level or other levels, European level, perhaps by different strategies and different actors that can be involved institutionally. But I think this is something that is more as a longer-term effort. Also, what works well, I agree with Paula that she mentioned these more innovative ways that reach people's perceptions on a daily basis, such as the movies. So bringing something that can be perceived very complicated or legally, very specific regulatory issues of investigations to the people's attention, a more popular attention, to communicate in a way that they are able to consume. And I really also find it very interesting how you mentioned, Paula, the example of the President Maya Sandu's speeches, where she was integrating the narratives in the local languages, because I think it's not only about what is being said and how often and how much and to whom, but also to make sure that people relate to it on this more personal basis. And we know that languages, be it minority languages or different languages between countries, or even with certain nuanced, dialects, or having this type of, really touches people differently, and may resonate more. So I think this understanding of this cultural identity levels of communication is quite effective. And maybe just the third, what is effective, I also think that we cannot just leave it to people being able to recognize and count on what reaches them and their perceptions, but we really need to have this more robust institutional and legal frameworks in place. As at the EU level, maybe some of you follow also more closely, there have been several regulations that have been adopted, be it the Digital Services Act, even Digital Markets Act, that also touches upon businesses, the AI Act, but also different policy initiatives from the European Democracy Action Plan, Code of Practice on Disinformation, toolboxes, FIMI toolbox, cyber toolbox, hybrid toolbox, so all of different type of toolboxes and policies, but also strong accountable regulations are important to make sure that there is a certain repercussion if these are breached, but also tools that you can refer to and count on, and also as a citizen being protected by. But then also the institutional infrastructure. Maybe one example to mention at the European level, because it's very recent, a couple of weeks ago, the release of the joint communication on the European Democracy Shield, where there are several outlined institutional suggestions and also plans that are going to be implemented by 2027. For example, also the European Democracy Center, or Center on Democratic Resilience, that will be created to better coordinate and the actors and also the efforts, the different centers and different member states initiatives. So I think these are important on top of all the other initiatives that work well. And just the last point on what to do better to strengthen the capacities. So I say this indeed to not only create new tools, but also be really considerate of implementing the tools we already have. So then be able to coordinate those actors involved in an effective way, because we sometimes may have an impression that there are a lot of things out there, but there is a lack of maybe streamlining of those efforts. And that goes also back to the member states and to the partners. And you asked about the wider Europe and neighboring countries. And I think this is important to integrate. So in this European Democracy Center on Resilience, for example, the candidate countries or potential candidate countries or like-minded partners will also are foreseen to be involved in these efforts on building democratic resilience. Or also we saw that with the accession and enlargement countries, there are also certain policies where they can already actively participate, or funds they can also receive to counter hybrid threats or foreign interference. And I think maybe that's going to be my last point for now. The money and the financial support is really important. And I think this, what we can do more and better is actually to scale this up. If we compare what we are spending on countering interference and what the hostile actors like Russia or others are spending on spreading and deploying these hybrid threats, it's really asymmetrical. It's hard to be able to really be effective and deterrent or even successfully fight against it. So one of the proposals we see in the Democracy Shield is also to make sure that these hybrid threats or FIMI are integrated into the increased defense spending, as the defense spending is really growing because of the obvious war of aggression of Russia, but also other challenges. So this could be integrated in these processes and financial frameworks.
Thank you very much, Nadia, for those excellent points. We have only 10 minutes left, and at the moment I don't have any questions in the Q&A tool. So I'll use the time. There was just one question came in, but still I will ask one more question to Artur and Vardine, namely about when you hear from the Moldovan experience, listen to the Moldovan experience, and the tools and instruments that were used in the Moldovan case, to what extent do you think they would be applicable in the Armenian context? And what risks do you see there, for example, when it comes to using the courts, intelligence services? Are you confident in them, and is society confident in them? Or what are the societal risks also if the Armenian government pursues a very proactive approach here? Whoever would like to start. Okay, Vardine, maybe you start.
I was actually thinking about how the tools will work here and what could be effective. What tools that we have seen in Moldova, definitely. We would very much appreciate if we saw more action from the government, which we haven't seen so far. It would be good if they actually took the threats more seriously, or were more open about the activities that they're taking. As not having to be diplomatic, I could say that it is probably easier for Moldovan government to speak about the threat coming from Russia, because kind of like the confrontation is quite open. This is not the case for Armenia. So for Armenian government to actually openly admit that this is the direct threat that they're seeing and that they're taking actions against it is quite a step that we will not be seeing probably soon. But one thing, since we have very little time, I just wanted to highlight one thing. I think it was very important also for Moldova to still have the traditional election observation in place, not only the disinformation anti-disinformation campaigns, because I do feel that with so much focus on disinformation, on debunking, pre-bunking, and kind of like all these media tools, there is a tendency to forget that having people on the ground is important as well. Because in this case, we're speaking also about, when we're looking at the Armenian case, we also have politically biased observation that is promoting narratives about electoral violations on the ground on election day. And in this case, fact-checking is actually important on the ground. So it's not about checking sources or whatever. It's actually about being there and making sure that you're reporting the correct information. So I feel like when we're focusing on one aspect of hybrid threats, that is the digital kind of threats, it is important not to leave the others out and also continue the support for that.
Thank you very much, Vardine. Artur, you want to go next? And there's also a question for you in the chat, I believe. So maybe you can just combine your answers.
Sure. So I do feel that something has changed in Armenia over the past 7 years. People are actually caring about their vote. They're not scared anymore. So I was hoping that Vardine could address it, but over the past several elections, I've seen that people are not really selling their votes, and people have understood that when they were sort of selling their votes to oligarchs, to Russians, to whoever, they are losing way too much. Also, the country has moved into middle-income territory, so I feel that it's going to be much more expensive to buy somebody, because I mean, there's also the saying that there's everything is sold anyway. It just has to be the right price. So I do expect that there will be some attempts to kick up and jack up the price for vote buying, but I don't expect that to be a major factor. There's also a direct question to me about Azerbaijani and Russian disinformation narratives. What I can say is we're seeing a lot of cases when these narratives will start circulating through Telegram channels or some TikTok videos, or even like Martina mentioned, we would see that something is planted specifically in a Turkish media outlet or in a Russian media outlet, then it is recirculated, retranslated, or a minor Twitter channel, X channel can comment to a big Armenian fact checker or news website asking to respond. So when the media outlet responds, it sort of spreads the message of the fact check of fake narrative without even wanting to do so. And if they don't respond, it feels that like they have nothing to respond to that. That's why they didn't. So it's a very but it's a tested tactic that we've seen also used against the EU countries, against France, for example. So Viginium, the French agency working on this, has covered this in ample detail, and we're seeing this exact tactic also in Armenia. As for the efficiency of fact-checking, I feel that the fact-checking is not very effective per se. It is a very useful tool, but that's just one tool in the toolbox. And also, we're seeing these narratives since this February of this year, but also starting from February this year, we're also seeing very big cyber operations. For example, one of the operations was when the Russian hackers, we have sort of, with the help of prior research from Velocity and Google's Mandiant, we've identified that this is Russian infrastructure, and they've created the fake Signal account for EU ambassador in Armenia, Vasilis Maragos, and on behalf of the EU ambassador, they sent Microsoft Teams invitations to civil society actors, about 5,000 of them, and a couple of them had actually clicked the link, provided the authentication, and we noted how hackers are trying to control their computers. Luckily, we were there to stop these campaigns, but these could open up a huge vulnerability and a lot of chance for exfiltration of important data. So we are expecting many of those things to happen, especially since we're seeing this type of infrastructure level or very shrewd phishing attacks amplifying, like Paula noted very rightly, and I think Nadia as well. So this is what we're seeing. I guess that's to cut it short.
Thank you very much, Artur. Maybe I'll give back to Nadia also for the question on fact-checking. Where do you see its role? The question is, it's not visible for everyone. Does it actually help to curb the spread of disinformation, or can it unintentionally contribute to it? What are the latest insights on that? And I think there's also, no, this is about Armenia, so let's see if we can cover it later. So Nadia.
Of course, yes. I think it's also about how we are using the fact checkers' work. So if you think about them fact checking and providing the database of what is there, or having the access to the accurate information, it is of course extremely valuable to have that, especially for those that further work on the research or the media journalists that don't have to spend that time and can directly find that information in the databases that are also public or accessible to researchers. But I think what we can do next also and we start doing it also with the European Fact Checkers Network, is to give them capacities or tools to have more anticipatory capabilities. So since there has been a lot of information already collected, and it will continue being collected, but being able to identify the trends and the patterns will be the next step to also foresee better perhaps what's coming out, because there is such a repetition of many narratives, of also a lot of themes, right, that have been used and abused in different contexts, countries, regions, situations, elections, or Olympic Games or so, that keep repeating in different scenarios. So I think having this capacity for them and the tools to be able to anticipate more and provide this analysis that can lead to identification of these trends and patterns can be really another way to use the fact checkers already very valuable, extensive work of databases. But then again, it's also about how we use the fact checkers, right? So one of the things what I just would like to emphasize is that whenever we are communicating to wider public, to avoid a very common mistake is to not say that this was being said, but this is true. So we don't give second visibility to the false or manipulated narrative, but we just say, you know, to mitigate the previous manipulated information or the efforts to do that, the need for the focus is this and that. So not repeating the thing. So it's also about us learning from this, and fact checkers also communicating perhaps in various new ways, but it's still contributing a lot.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I think we have time for one last question, and then unfortunately we have to wrap up. So Paula, I would like to get back to you and ask about Moldovan civil society's positioning ahead of the elections, because I feel that it won't be easy for Armenian civil society to, on the one hand, remain independent and to keep its independence ahead of the electoral race, but at the same time to counter disinformation that tackles the current course of the government. So was that a challenge also in Moldova? Was it something that was discussed, that civil society would fear that it would be seen as pro-government and lose its independence?
Yeah, I think that's still kind of the case. It's about choosing the battles, basically. And for instance, Iarul de Gardă, which launched those first two investigations, they have been accused of, by mainly kind of pro-Russian actors, that they are this in the pockets of the government, although sometimes they do also publish more critical stuff of policies by the government. But an attack over independent media has been really, really intense during the electoral period and even before and after. And it's this kind of attempt to make people mistrust traditional media and the voices that are pro-European, but not outwardly kind of part of a political party. So we're in the same boat, and we're on the front lines as well.
Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you to all our speakers. Unfortunately, our time is up already, but we promise to follow up. I think this was a really rich discussion, and we have 6 months until the elections in Armenia, and there is a lot to do. There are many threats to electoral integrity and public trust in the elections, threats from Russia, but as we discussed, also from Azerbaijan and Turkey. There is much room for improvement or for accelerating the government's response, and there is a lot to learn from Moldova and other cases, although both the types of and narratives of interference, external interference, and the tools available to respond differ in each case. And I think this is something to look at more closely, how, for example, the Armenian case also differs from Moldova, what additional challenges will be there that we can contribute to addressing. So thank you all very much. As promised, we will upload this webinar and share it, and hope to continue the discussion in the coming month. Thank you.